So good afternoon. My name is Mike Niehaus. I'm Director of Product Marketing on the Windows team. For the next 75 minutes or so, we want to talk about servicing Windows 10 and really making sure that everyone understands the tweaks that we've been continuing to make for Windows as a service and the whole servicing process. I thought it would be good to start off just by kind of taking you through the basics, some of the things that we've changed over the past few months, just to make sure that we start with a good baseline. We made some announcements initially back in April and then again in July, talking about how we've made some changes aligning between Windows, Office, and System Center. So we'll do a quick overview of what those changes are. First, we've moved to predictable releases twice per year. We call those semi-annual channel releases. We'll come out with those in the spring and the fall of each year. Our target for those is generally around the March and September timeframe, although the exact timing of that can vary a little bit, just depending on when those Windows 10 releases are ready. The Office guys may go a little bit later, the Windows may go a little bit earlier. I mean, it can vary a little bit, but generally we'll be in the spring and fall timeframe, and we'll have 2 releases per year. So obviously then about 6 months in between each one of those. Each one of those releases then will be serviced for about 18 months from the date of release. So if we release our Fall Creators Update on October 17th, count 18 months forward from that point in time, that's when the end of servicing would be for that release. So you have this constantly sliding scale of releases where we have multiple releases supported at any point in time, but you need to continue to move forward. You need to continue deploying these new feature updates so that you continue to stay serviced and supported on the Windows 10 platform. We align with Office to make it simpler to do these together. And as I mentioned, that there can be some variation, so these won't be perfectly aligned, but they're pretty close, so that if you are using Office 365 Pro Plus and Windows 10 Enterprise or Windows 10 Pro, you can deploy them together and deploy both sets of updates at the same time. If you want, you don't have to. You could say, well, we're going to deploy Windows 10 first and then we're going to deploy Office, or we're going to deploy Office first and then Windows 10. It doesn't really matter. Just keep in mind that the servicing timelines are pretty well aligned, so you do need to move to whatever the most recent one is before the current one that you're running is no longer serviced. Most of you are probably running System Center Configuration Manager, since it's probably the most popular management tool out there. So you need to keep in mind the pattern that Config Manager goes through. Now, while Windows and Office are on a twice per year release, about every 6 months, spring and fall, Config Manager is releasing 3 times per year, about every 4 months. Config Manager then generally adds support for the latest Windows 10 release in kind of 2 phases. The first phase is basic compatibility support. They'll make sure that the current Config Manager version is able to manage the Windows 10 release. In the springtime, when the Windows 10 release comes out, there's a pretty small window between the Config Manager version that comes out and the Windows 10 version that comes out shortly thereafter. But those are the versions that align from that perspective. In the fall, there's a little bit more time because the Config Manager release that offers compatibility support comes out in the summertime. In the case of full support, like adding support in Config Manager for the latest Windows 10 features, that generally then comes with the Config Manager release after the Windows 10 release. So if Windows 10 1709 comes out in October, it will be supported by Config Manager 1706, and then new Windows 10 functionality would be added in Config Manager 1710. So we get into that rhythm where there are overlaps on the Config Manager releases. You just need to keep track of which one you need to use. They do publish a nice table in the Config Manager documentation that tells you exactly which release to use. We have made some tweaks to that over the past months just to make this as clear as possible that these are these are the releases that you need to be using. Now, when we look at kind of the bigger picture, we don't really want you to think of those release dates, which are represented on this diagram by the plus signs, as the starting point for that release, because the starting point for that release is actually 6 months earlier, when we've started the development of that release and we start releasing insider preview builds for that release. We want every organization to deploy those preview builds and start using those to plan and prepare for the release that's going to be coming. That's not just about trying out the new features. That's not just about putting it on a second machine and periodically kicking the tires and seeing what's changed in this release. It's really about trying to use those insider preview builds to go about your day-to-day job to see if anything bad is happening. If there are any application compatibility issues, if there are any regressions in behaviors, or if there are any issues at all, we want you to report those to us so that we can fix them while we're still developing that release before we even ship it to the general population. So as many machines as you can possibly get into that insider preview process, into the insider preview program, the better. Now with Windows 10 1709, we'll make that even easier. We will create some group policies that can be deployed out to devices to say these devices should automatically enroll in the insider preview program and take the periodic releases that we make to the insider preview channel. So that enables you to target a broader set of machines more easily. You don't have to go from machine to machine and enroll them with a Microsoft account. So you want to get machines into the insider preview to plan and prepare. You then want to be waiting for that release date, and as soon as that release date happens, begin piloting, begin deploying to a percentage of your organization. Now the exact percentages and the ring structure and those other things we'll try to get into a little bit more later, but you want to start right away so that you can build up trust, build up confidence in the release itself. You want to make sure that your application portfolio has been validated on that new release by doing those targeted pilot deployments and then expanding out to broad deployments within a few months after that. Now, every customer will go about that in maybe a slightly different way and at a slightly different pace. So you begin broad deployment whenever you're ready. If that takes you 2 months, if that takes you 4 months, if that takes you 6 months, doesn't matter. As soon as you have that level of confidence because you validated most of the apps, devices, and infrastructure, then you start. You start deploying broadly and try to get that broad deployment done as quickly as possible so that you then have enough time to continue using that release before it's time to repeat this whole process over again. So don't think of each of these releases as a project that you need to set up to deploy them. Think of this as a continual process because you're always going to be planning and preparing using Insider Preview, piloting using the most recent release, and broadly deploying and using the release before that. So you'll typically always be looking at 3 different releases of Windows at the same time. That's the rhythm that you'll get into. That requires potentially some shuffling a little bit of manpower because it used to be that you did these big deployment projects every 3 to 5 years. Now you're doing these small feature update deployments more or less continually. Twice per year, but if they take 6 months to complete, well, you're always going to be doing them. So let's then talk a little bit more about why. I mean, overall, if we look at all the different Microsoft products, all the different engineering teams have all moved to a much more frequent release cadence. There are a lot of reasons for doing that, but certainly security is driving that as kind of the primary focus. We need to continually be adding security features to the OS and to every other product to try to stay ahead of the bad guys. So security is key. There are also additional productivity benefits and additional features being added all the time so that we can get more value to you more quickly. You don't want to have to wait 3 to 5 years to get any new features anymore. I mean, those days are over and done. At the same time, we want to simplify deployment and management overall. That's why we're working with tools like Windows Update for Business and System Center Configuration Manager and Autopilot and all these other things that we've been talking about this week to try to make this as easy as possible to deploy Windows 10 and then to continue managing it. The cloud's also very important, so adding support for various cloud services into all of these products certainly then puts us at a much faster pace for innovating and connecting up with these cloud pieces. So let's talk a little bit more about security. What we've seen in the past is that we've done releases every, let's say, 3 to 5 years. And those releases basically establish a particular baseline, a plateau of the security capabilities. That means that there is a constant level where the bad guys can exploit weaknesses in the platform. When the platform was released, it was perfectly secure. Over time, people figure out how to poke holes in it. That leaves these protection gaps. That yes, we do security updates and we do fixes and we keep patching the holes, but the typical way that we've described it is, well, you can only apply so much spackling before you need to replace the dam. That there are going to be leaks, there are going to be problems, we need to make architectural changes, we need to add new security features, we need to stay ahead of the bad guys. Releasing every 3 to 5 years doesn't work anymore because the bad guys have organized. It used to just be script kiddies in basements trying to create chaos, but it's much broader than that. So now we need to have those twice per year releases just so that we can stay out ahead. Every single Windows 10 release is guaranteed to add new security features. So if you don't deploy one, you're at a disadvantage. You don't have those security features. You aren't able to withstand the latest new type of attack that's coming your way. We also know that productivity is important and disruption is bad. So how do we tie those two together? How do we give you more capabilities more quickly and at the same time reduce the amount of disruption? Fortunately, those two tend to go together. If we do every 3 to 5 year release, we're basically then depositing 5 years worth of changes onto your users at the same time. That's a big amount of change, and that tends to be fairly disruptive. If we do releases twice per year, those features, those changes are much more incremental. And as a result of that, don't impact the end users nearly as much. They adapt much more gradually because the change is coming much more gradually. They don't have to deal with a massive change to the user interface because we don't make massive changes to the user interface. We make subtle changes through each release to continue to enhance it. We also have a much different story now when it comes to integration between Windows and the hardware that it runs on top of. It used to be that to support a new piece of hardware, we just needed a new set of drivers, and you inject those new set of drivers into the operating system and everything's good. These days, Windows needs to be tweaked. Windows needs to be adapted to understand the hardware that it's running on top of so that you get the best battery life, the best performance, and can take advantage of the latest features that are being added into the hardware. As a result of that, we have this silicon support policy that basically states that we need to have a new Windows release every time there's a new generation of processors and chipsets that comes out. That doesn't happen that frequently, but still it's a once or twice per year event as the hardware continues to move forward. Therefore, we need Windows releases to go along with that. If you're on the semi-annual channel where Windows is releasing every 6 months, generally we're always going to be out in front of the hardware because we'll get the hardware in-house, we'll evaluate it, we'll make the necessary changes, we'll include those in the next Windows release, which hopefully corresponds with about the same time that you can actually buy those new devices using that new hardware. So it's a good thing overall that we need to be able to stay up to date to take advantage of the latest hardware capabilities. That gets us to the real challenge of this, which is if you look at your typical deployment project, it was big. I mean, it was probably anywhere from a 12 to a 36-month project where you pulled all of these people together. They spent a good chunk of their time going through and testing out every single application, every single web page, all parts of your infrastructure, easily spending probably 12 to 18 months before you even deploy the first machine, just to plan and prepare for that deployment. That, combined with infrastructure updates, creating new images, all of that effort results in a very big project. So what you had to do is try to translate that into something much smaller. How do you go from this really big project every 3 to 5 years to a much smaller project about every 6 months? Well, you don't do it as a project, you do it as a process. We want to get into that continual process of doing this. In order for this to really work, we had to solve the biggest problem. The biggest problem in the past has been application compatibility. As you moved from Windows XP to Windows 7, yeah, application compatibility was fair. I mean, you had to go through a lot of testing to validate those. As we went from 7 to 8 to 8.1 to 10, the compatibility has been a whole lot stronger, and as a result, the validation can be much more relaxed. We want to move away from explicitly testing every single application that you have in your portfolio to instead prioritizing, finding the most important business critical apps and validating those, and for the rest, let's just deploy and see what happens. When we go back and look at the Windows 7 deployment projects that most organizations did, they would spend 12 to 18 months testing out all the apps. Then they would start deploying. And if that testing were rock solid, you would say, well, okay, it's now time to start deploying. We can deploy full speed ahead because we have an utmost 100% level of confidence in our testing. But no organization ever did that. All the organizations would go through that 12 to 18 months of testing, and at the end of it, were so confident in the testing that they would deploy 1 machine, 5 machines, 10 machines, 20 machines, just to see what happens. And it would never fail that they would end up finding more issues through those slowly ramped up deployments than they did in the testing initially. So the testing can only find so much. You really need to use the software in the real world, trying it out with people going about their day-to-day job to find those issues so that you can then take action on them. So these ring deployment processes that we talk about with Windows 10 are really nothing new. Customers have been doing them for a long time. It's just that ramped up process of trying to get coverage of all your applications in real world scenarios to make sure that they actually work properly. That's what we want you to go through, to be able to say, yeah, I've identified a subset of my population that I can deploy this new Windows 10 feature update to see what happens. Knowing that if they run into any issues, which are going to be fairly rare because we have high levels of compatibility, they will pick up the phone, call IT, and say help. Now, of course, you as an IT organization need to have remediation plans in place. You need to understand what's going to happen if a user calls in and asks for help. What am I going to do? Am I going to roll them back to the previous Windows release? We can do that if it's within the first 10 days after they've been upgraded. Are we going to give them a new machine to use temporarily? Are we going to give them access to a VDI session? Are we going to give them access to a remote desktop session? Whatever the remediation plan is, we need to have one. We need to be able to say, for that 1% where that application doesn't work quite right, how are they going to get their normal job done? But we definitely need to get out of the thinking that this is testing. If you consider testing to be something that the person needs to do solely for the purpose of coming back with a yay or nay answer, no, we don't want to do that anymore. We want to do validation. Validation just means people are doing their normal jobs and not having any complaints. That's what we want to get into. building up over time, deploying to rings, getting feedback, and based on that feedback, continuing to expand out. We have a lot of people running Windows 10, over 500 million that we've talked about. We have customers, large customers, that have deployed Windows 10 inside of their organization and are now starting to go through this Windows as a Service model. We've talked to some of them, like Kimberly Clark, who've said, great, we've been going through this exercise, it's reduced our overall operating system deployment time by 75%. Woohoo, great. Although, if you think about it, if you look at the pace that we're deploying, if you deployed every 5 years and now you're deploying twice per year, that's a 10-time increase in the rate of deployment. Therefore, your cost should be probably about 90% less. So we would look at that 75% and say, it's a start. We're not quite there yet. We can make this better. We can continue to improve it, which is why we continue to make these tweaks and these adjustments to the Windows as a Service model, why we keep making more engineering investments to make this better overall, so that the next quote we get from them says, yeah, we've now reduced it by 94% from what we had originally started from. We want it to become smooth, a normal day-to-day process that you don't have to worry about. We'll get there. We've also talked to another customer who wanted to remain nameless, who said, wow, we just upgraded a third of our devices from Windows 10 1607 to 1703 in 3 business days, which is phenomenal. Given the size of that customer, that was tens of thousands of devices. They just said, hey, everything's looking good. Our validation has been very solid. Let's just push the button and deploy to a large percentage of our population and see how it goes. It's been smooth. That's what we want to get to. We want this to be a smooth process that you can do throughout your organization, ramping up over time to get to the point where you're ready for broad deployment and can just push that button. Another customer that we've been working with is Accenture. They have a session this afternoon where they're talking about their experiences down this path. While this session is being presented at the same time as one I'm presenting, I'll still tell you, go to this one. The session that I have this afternoon is a 45-minute session on reducing the size impact of Windows as a Service and Windows updates. This one's much more the real-world experiences with Windows as a Service and Windows 10. So you can make your choice, but I think this one will be a really good session. So this is what we're getting into, this idea of being always up to date so that you get the latest productivity, security, hardware support, all that good stuff. Moving from a project to a process where we are continually going through that deployment process with these 2 feature updates per year. As we look at this from a process perspective, there are certain tasks that need to be done. From the planning and preparing phase, which is based around Windows Insider Preview builds, you need to be looking at compatibility, you need to be looking at new features and figuring out how you want to deploy those new features. How do you want to implement those features? How do you want to configure those features? That gets you prepared by the point of release to do those targeted pilot deployments, which are now designed to cover the broadest set of your application portfolio by having people go about their day-to-day job and letting you know if anything goes wrong. It's then your responsibility as IT to react to any issues that are raised, to be able to remediate those issues, and then continue to expand out the deployment process to the rest of the organization. That's when we get into that broad deployment phase. At that point, it's really a different focus. It's not about coverage of the applications anymore because you've already done that. Now it's just about risk reduction. Like, you wouldn't necessarily want to deploy the entire accounting organization at once. That's a little bit on the risky side. If there's some unknown issue that hasn't popped up yet, you don't want your entire accounting organization to not be able to give you a paycheck. So, okay, let's say maybe we need to split the accounting group into two, and we'll do one part of it this week and we'll do the other part of it next week. A much different focus. It's not about trying to figure out who do we target to get coverage of the apps. It's all about just trying to minimize disruption overall. So we've shown pictures similar to this one for quite a while, where we talked about the ring deployments and the percentages of machines that you would typically include in each one of those. And what we've seen overall is that there are too few people in the first one, planning and preparing. Having one or two machines in that category really isn't enough. You need more. You need to have hopefully much closer to 1% of your machines, maybe your entire IT organization, using insider preview builds to figure out what new features are coming, and just kind of at a high level for the general productivity apps that even IT people use, like Office and applications like that. Is everything looking good? Are they working well? Is our infrastructure working okay? Are our management tools working okay? Is our security software working okay? Once you get beyond that and move into the targeted pilot, the discussion really becomes then, how many users do I need to include in that to cover, say, 90% of the applications used throughout the organization? Generally, if you've got an application portfolio of a couple thousand applications, you can get usage of those couple thousand applications using about 10% of the organization. It's going to vary depending on your business, depending on your applications, but this doesn't need to be a huge percentage of the organization going through these targeted pilots. And then everything else falls into that broad deployment bucket. So insider preview channel, use it as much as possible. Semi-annual channel from the point of release, starting on hopefully day 0, and then getting you to the point where you can begin that broad deployment as quickly as possible. So we talked before about how to reduce the project size. Obviously, there are some changes necessary. Application validation, I can repeat myself probably a third or fourth time, but that's going to be the biggest one because that's always been the biggest cost for doing deployment projects, testing out the applications. The infrastructure side is actually a lot easier because we have things like Config Manager Current Branch in place now. Once you've implemented Config Manager Current Branch, the process of keeping Config Manager up to date is just periodically going into the console, right-clicking and saying install. It will go through the whole process of upgrading your Config Manager environment, the servers, the clients, and everything else. So it's a much simpler process. We've also made sure that Windows 10 doesn't have nearly as many heavy dependencies on other pieces of infrastructure, like Windows Server. You don't need to upgrade your servers just because you wanted to deploy a new Windows 10 client operating system. So overall, the infrastructure savings are pretty easy. From a deployment process perspective, it's all about kind of moving away from imaging. While a lot of customers will say, yeah, I'm going to do an image-based deployment to get from Windows 7 to Windows 10, that's not something you can continue to do with Windows 10 feature updates every 6 months. Wiping and loading every single machine every 6 months, not possible. Requires way too much effort. But doing feature update deployments, which leverage an in-place upgrade process that automatically preserves all your apps data and settings while laying down a new operating system, that's doable. That's something that can be done, greatly simplifying that deployment process overall. John Wilcox has a session tomorrow at about the same time as this one, talking about how to design and complete this whole process. How do you get to Windows 10? How do you implement Windows as a service? I'd highly recommend that session. He'll get much more in-depth into kind of the learnings that he's gathered by his travels around the world, talking to individual customers and helping them through some of the pain points that they've had with implementing Windows as a service. So let's dig in a little deeper to each of those areas. First, on the application validation side. We need to identify the entire application portfolio, every application that you support in your organization. A lot of organizations went through that once for Y2K. They went through it again as they moved to Windows 7. And unfortunately, every time they complete that process, they throw away the results. This is a continual process. You always need to know what applications you support inside your organization, what application versions you're currently using through your organization, what additional updates are available for those applications. It's all about really trying to maintain a managed environment, and this is a key step in that managed environment. Identify all of those applications, prioritize them. We want to focus on the most business-critical apps to test those up front before we do any large-scale deployments. And when we say business critical, we really mean business critical. If this is an app that would cause your business to shut down if it doesn't work, okay, you should probably test that. But Adobe Reader, it's probably not a critical app. It's something that's easy to validate. You deploy it, you deploy the new feature update and see if anyone complains. There are definitely different categories of applications. You can do structured testing, ideally even automated testing on the critical apps. For most organizations, typically that could be 10% or so of the applications. That can be done every 6 months. For the rest of the applications, we want to be able to validate via pilot deployments. We do have some tools to help out with this process, like Windows Analytics, where we can gather inventory from the machines, merge that with our known list of incompatible applications, merge that with ready for Windows data, where we can show you, does this application have a support statement from the ISV? Does this application, is it frequently used on this version of Windows 10? And you can then use that to infer the importance of testing that application. If it's an application where the ISV says, yes, we support it, and it's an application that's in use on hundreds of thousands of other devices all around the world, why do you need to test it again? That's one that you can probably say, yep, check that one off of the list. But if you've got an app that's unique to you, that there's no proof that it's used anywhere else in the world, and that it's critical to your organization, okay, that's one that you should probably spend some time on. When we talk about compatibility overall, we need to look at kind of a few different categories. Really, two that we need to focus on are desktop apps and websites. From the desktop app perspective, what we've heard from customers is they're seeing about 99% compatibility. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. As a result of that, you can take a little bit more of a chance. You can do these pilot deployments and use that for real-world validation without doing that upfront testing. The way we maintain that level of compatibility primarily is we just don't make any significant changes to the Win32 APIs that these apps are running on top of. There are certainly changes to Windows all around these APIs, but the APIs themselves maintain a very strict contract with these applications, therefore the apps continue to work. But we're also watching a lot of things ourselves via telemetry and reacting to things that we see that look suspicious. Like imagine the many insider machines that we have running out there. We can see via telemetry that a certain application, say Contoso whatever, is running on that machine. And it's being used pretty consistently from day to day. And then we release this new build, and suddenly the usage drops to 0. Well, something fishy is going on. Maybe the application's not working. Maybe it's crashing on startup. Maybe it just doesn't work the way the user wants it to. And therefore, they've just kind of pushed it aside and said, yeah, we can't do anything. So we would be able to see that sort of telemetry and take action on that telemetry before they would even submit the feedback into the feedback hub to say, hey, we're having this issue with this application. So we're watching that data. We're then reaching out to the ISVs, or in some cases just going out and installing the app ourselves and seeing what happened. So we are constantly going through that process as part of the Insider Preview program to try to get a lot of those issues identified even before we release that new feature update. On the web page side, we have kind of a dual browser strategy that we have in place. Let's use Edge for everything new. Edge has support for the latest web standards. It has very high levels of compatibility with Chrome and other browsers. It is fast, it's tuned to the hardware, it leverages all of the operating system features. Great, it's a modern browser. Internet Explorer is not a modern browser. Internet Explorer is a compatible browser. So Internet Explorer remains around to make sure that you can run your older web apps, those ones that were written for IE5, IE6, IE7, IE8, IE9, IE10. Guess what? Internet Explorer will still run all of those web apps. So the real key becomes, how do I jump between the two? How do I use two browsers at once in a way that the users would actually understand? The only way that works is to automate it. We can put policies in place with enterprise mode so that if a user launches Edge and types in a URL that doesn't work with Edge, we redirect it to Internet Explorer. If they're then in Internet Explorer, we don't want them to stay there for everything. So if they type in another URL that doesn't require Internet Explorer into the address bar, we'll bounce that one back to Edge so that they're always using the best browser for the task. Now that does require a little bit of work on your side to make sure that enterprise mode is configured appropriately to say, all of these can work with Edge, all of these require Internet Explorer in some document mode. You've probably gone through a portion of that exercise already as you move to IE11 on Windows 7, so you have a pretty good starting point for that. You just need to take it that next step and say, by default, everything that's not on that compatibility list is going to work with Edge and therefore should be redirected into Edge. I mentioned Ready for Windows. If you haven't checked out the readyforwindows.com site, you should definitely do that. You can see a couple of views from this site. One will show you a list of common software applications in different categories, like antivirus software. At a glance, you can see all the antivirus vendors, their software, and whether it's compatible with the new feature update when it comes out. Or you can use search. Type in the name of a particular ISV or an application that you care about. It will come back with the search results showing you the application details, the versions that we can see installed on all those 500 million machines that are reporting telemetry back to us. And you can be able to tell then which of those versions are broadly in use on Windows 10 and which ones aren't. Again, if it's broadly used, why do you want to test it again? It's probably working fine. We reach out to as many ISVs as possible to teach them how this Windows as a Service process works, to make sure that they understand that they need to publish their support statements so we can list them on Ready for Windows, and that they need to be ready to go with each new feature update on the day that it comes out. In the past, ISVs would just say, no, we're going to sit and wait until our users start asking about the new operating system version, and then we'll consider adding support for it in the coming months. That's not the model anymore. Now they need to assume that any of their customers that are running on top of Windows 10, which is all of their customers expect that software to work from the day that the new release comes out. So those ISVs, they'll be using insider preview builds to try out their applications to make sure everything's working fine, so that by the time the release comes out, if their app doesn't work, they can at least tell you what you need to do to fix it. They could say, apply this patch, apply this update, make this tweak, and everything will be fine. That ties us into the next piece of the puzzle, Windows Analytics. Windows Analytics is a tool that ties together the inventory of your devices with the Ready for Windows data and the known list of compatibility information to give you a single view showing you all of your devices and whether they're ready for this Windows 10 feature update or not. That's the upgrade readiness piece. It helps you plan the deployment process for each of these feature updates. We also have two other components, Update Compliance and Device Health, which focus on different parts of the same challenge. On the update compliance side, we want to make sure you're fully patched, and if you're not fully patched, that you understand why you're not fully patched. On the device health side, we want to be able to identify things that are going wrong in your environment and tell you that, hey, you need to take some action. People are seeing slow login times, people are seeing slow boot times, applications are crashing, anything like that. We want to be able to identify and alert you prior to the users picking up the phone and calling the help desk. Help desk calls are expensive. Troubleshooting an entire class of issues, like a particular application crashing, those are easy to investigate to try to fix them for hundreds of people at once, rather than trying to get that 100 support calls for something like that. So Windows Analytics is the overall suite. From the upgrade readiness perspective, we have the specific capabilities there. So there is a whole series of sessions on Windows Analytics. Rama and Mark are talking about Windows Analytics overall, and then there are drill down sessions into each of the components, upgrade readiness, update compliance, and device health. So definitely check out those 4 sessions around Windows Analytics throughout the week. On the upgrade readiness side, I mentioned that we're pulling together telemetry, compatibility details based on our known list of incompatible software and drivers, as well as the Ready for Windows data. We put it into an Azure OMS workspace, which provides business intelligence reporting capabilities that lets you drill into the data to see kind of step by step, here's how you need to go about the deployment process. First, tell me about issues. Second, tell me kind of the prioritized list of issues and which ones I could address to get the most machines ready the fastest, because I want to work on the most impactful issues and work my way down the list to try to get as many machines possible for deployment as quickly as possible. We can build a whole process around that. We can integrate this with System Center Configuration Manager. We can integrate this with Intune, and we can use that then to drive the deployment process of new feature updates out to the machines. So it's easy for us to use the results of our work here to help with the targeting of machines. If a machine's ready, Config Manager knows about it, therefore let's deploy to that machine. On the upgrade readiness side, there is a session on Friday morning that Zach is running. Definitely check that out if you haven't dug deep into the upgrade readiness piece to get a much deeper understanding of the capabilities and the enhancements that we're continuing to make around that. I mentioned Internet Explorer and the dual browser strategy. Basically, we want you to make Edge the default browser. Once Edge is set as the default browser, you can then define the enterprise mode site list so that sites that don't support Edge are automatically redirected to IE11. And we can set a policy then for IE that says anything that doesn't require IE, switch it back automatically to Edge. I mean, that's all that it takes to set up that dual browser strategy. Now, we have seen that other browsers have kind of set up a portion of that it's not too hard for another browser to say redirect to IE for things that aren't compatible. The challenge is coming back, because we see a lot of users who don't quite notice that they switched from one browser to the other, so they just see an address bar up there and they type in another URL, and they then keep using IE for everything, which isn't the best experience. We really want them to use a modern browser for as much as possible. There is an enterprise Microsoft Edge usage session in, well, it already happened on Monday afternoon. So if you didn't go to that session to learn more about these enterprise mode and dual browser scenarios, definitely check out the recording for that particular session. Now let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure side. From an infrastructure perspective, you kind of have two approaches. You have two choices. You have the traditional, you have the modern. The nice thing is if you use a modern approach, the infrastructure is kept up to date for you. They're cloud services. You never need to touch them. You never need to worry about, did I deploy the necessary updates for Azure Active Directory, Intune, Windows Update for Business? They're just always kept up to date. You just administer them. If you're doing traditional, well, then you have to worry about keeping them up to date. Primarily, System Center Configuration Manager, current branch, and Active Directory. Those are the two main pieces that we use on the client side to do traditional management. As I mentioned before, Config Manager Current Branch has been simplified as much as possible. Right-click, update. Active Directory, we don't have any strong ties, so you generally won't need to update Active Directory as you update Windows 10. There may be some minor maintenance that you need to do, like every Windows 10 release comes out with new group policies. As a result, there are new group policy templates, so you need to update your domain controllers with the latest group policy templates. Beyond that, there shouldn't be much work to do on the server side. When we look at Config Manager, the updates and servicing node is basically how you keep Config Manager up to date. For those of you who haven't yet made the leap to Config Manager Current Branch, you're not part of that 100 million devices that Brad Anderson talked about earlier this week. That's the first step. You need to get from Config Manager 2012 or 2012 R2 onto the current branch to support the current Windows 10 releases. Once you're there, you use the updates and servicing node. It will notify you when there are new releases available. You just need to right-click and choose to install the update pack. The key work then becomes the deployment process. How do we build those rings? How do we define the pilot groups? How do we target the broad deployment groups? So conceptually, rings are really nothing more than groups of machines that we're using to target. So we have to figure out what kind of rings do we want? Who do we put into them? How do we determine that sort of thing? We also need to try to reduce the network impact, which is the session that I have later this afternoon. We want to be able to use peer-to-peer technologies like branch cache or delivery optimization or config manager peer caching to be able to have one machine download the content and then share it with all the other PCs on the same network segment, so that we don't have tens of thousands of machines all going out and grabbing 2 gigabytes worth of stuff off the server. We want to minimize the impact on the end user. We hear a lot from customers who say, gosh, this feature update takes somewhere between 20 and 90 minutes to install, depending on the hardware. How do I reduce the amount of time that's lost by users who are sitting in front of the machine while it's being upgraded? Well, don't upgrade it while they're sitting in front of the machine. That's the simple answer. The question becomes, how do you do that? How do you make sure that the updates are deployed either at a time of the user's choosing or when you know that they're not going to be using the machine? Now, for desktop PCs that are connected to the corporate network, that's easy. For them, you just target middle of the night when no one's using the machine. For laptops and other devices that typically are carried home with the user, yeah, it gets to be a little bit more interesting, but we can certainly take advantage of some capabilities that we have in Windows to do things like active hours configuration, to say you should only install during these time periods. You should notify the user to give them a choice to schedule a different time. They should be able to choose themselves, because if they know that it's going to take about an hour and they take an hour lunch break, hey, they'd be smart enough to say, I'm going to go to lunch, I'm going to initiate this process now. So when we talk about rings, again, we want to have as many as possible in the insider preview process. That's typically just going to be IT and developer folks, because these are generally unsupported builds. So if you do run into any issues, yeah, you can report them to us via the feedback hub and other things, but you can't log a support case. So you're probably not going to then extend these out to the general population. You're going to wait until that release point. But as soon as we do the release, then you start deploying to multiple rings. And kind of the structure that we typically see is, let's start with some canaries. There are people inside your organization that are technically savvy, that like testing new things, that like trying out stuff. Figure out who they are. That's who we're going to go to first. They enjoy it. They want to do it. They want to provide you feedback. Then we can make it available for self-selection through self-service portals, through the software center in the config manager case, to allow people to kind of do it word of mouth. Hey, I just tried this out. It worked out pretty well. Why don't you give it a try? So we can expand out the base that way as well. Eventually, though, we're going to need to do more sampling because we need to hit machines that are running applications that haven't yet been validated. That becomes more of a data mining exercise to figure out what machines are those, who are the people that are running those machines, how do we build up that collection. We can certainly help with that with the Windows Analytics tools. We can certainly help with that using config manager reporting capabilities. We'll talk more about that in another session that John's doing, where he will dig deeper into how do we build up that whole strategy of building out those flights, building out those rings, and doing this deployment through the organization, starting from insider preview through the targeted deployments and into the broad deployment phase. We do have a variety of tools that can be used as part of this. Windows Update is kind of the consumer-focused way of doing this. All machines that are not being managed by an organization point to Windows Update. They automatically get the feature updates on a schedule that we determine. So we're basically IT to 500 million machines in the world. We figure out, using similar tools to what are in Windows Analytics, what machines are ready, what machines aren't, and we target the ones that are ready, slowly building up our level of confidence by going through these validation processes before we open up the floodgates and say, we're now ready for broad deployment, let's go. We have Windows Update for Business, which is a set of policies layered on top of Windows Update to give organizations more control over what happens when. So it leverages the same cloud infrastructure, the same cloud services, the same scalability, but giving you more control. That's the easy way. You don't need any infrastructure. You don't need any real administration of this service other than setting those policies. And then you just kind of sit back and watch. We have to do some compliance reporting potentially on top of that. So we'll introduce Windows Analytics back into the mix to do update compliance, which is why that new piece has been added there, so that you can then see, okay, all of my machines have been updated to this latest feature update. All of my machines have been patched with the latest monthly cumulative update. They can see that they're all up to date. Most of you, though, are probably running one of the other two, because these are the traditional on-prem components. Windows Server Update Services or System Center Configuration Manager. In the case of WSUS, we publish feature updates to WSUS. All you need to do to deploy them is approve them. As soon as they're approved, they go out to all the machines in the groups that you've targeted. You can build out your ring structure in Windows Server Update Services by creating multiple computer groups in WSUS and then target them one by one as you're ready to deploy. On the config manager side, there are multiple choices. You can use task sequences, you can use the Windows 10 servicing feature. Either way, it's going to be pulling content from the config manager distribution points and leveraging any of the available peer-to-peer mechanisms that are in place. So let's dig in a little deeper on each one of those. Windows Update for Business is servicing from the cloud, built on top of Windows Update, globally scaled. It is implemented through policies that you can configure either through GPOs or through MDM settings, through Intune or other MDM products. These settings basically say, I want to get this feature update at a particular point in time. Maybe it's at the date of release. Maybe it's when we declare that it's ready for broad deployment. Maybe it's 60, 90, 120, 180 days after a particular point in time. So you define those rules, apply those rules to different groups of machines, and that's how you implement your rings. We add Windows Analytics then for compliance reporting. There is a session specifically on Windows Update for Business that Sandeep and Narkis are doing tomorrow morning. So definitely check that out to get the deepest overview of Windows Update for Business, how you create those policies, how you deploy them, and how you do the reporting using Windows Analytics to measure compliance. Config Manager becomes the interesting one because it has two options: task sequences or Windows 10 servicing. Task sequences are generally what most people use today because task sequences allow you to do pre-processing steps and post-processing steps. So imagine a scenario where your antivirus vendor tells you that you need to install an updated version of antivirus software to support the new Windows 10 feature update. Fairly common. So you may need to add a step to a task sequence that removes the current incompatible version of the software, does the feature update, and then installs the new compatible version of the software, all as part of a single task sequence to do that. That's good, but it has a downside. If you do the Windows 10 servicing approach, it uses a different set of media. Task sequence servicing uses the contents of the Windows 10 ISO, which is roughly about 3.5 gigabytes for an x64 version of Windows 10. Windows 10 servicing uses the content from Windows Update or WSUS, which is about a gigabyte smaller. So the feature updates being deployed using task sequences are a gigabyte bigger, an additional gigabyte worth of stuff. As we move forward and add support for things like express feature updates, where the operating system is smart enough to only download the files that have changed, that will require doing more of a servicing-based approach because it requires leveraging the Windows Update agent for it to figure out what's actually changed between the two releases and only download what has changed. So over time, we want to definitely leverage the servicing approach as much as possible. We have put some changes in for Windows 10 1709, the Fall Creators Update, to do those express differential updates. Those express differential updates will reduce the size by about another 35%. So it's not a small change. It can get you from, say, 2.5 gig down to about 1.8 gig per machine as it's downloading those updates. And then it can do peer-to-peer to share that across the machines as well. That's what I'm talking about later this afternoon. So if you want to hear more about that whole story and the size reductions and the types of things that we can do to reduce the network impact, come back to my session later today. Peer-to-peer is certainly something that you want to implement. I don't care which peer-to-peer tool you put in place, pick one, implement it. Branch cache has been around for quite a while. It's built into Windows 10 Enterprise, but the pieces that we care about are also in Windows 10 Pro. So it doesn't matter what Windows you're using, you're good. It needs to be turned on. We prefer that it be used in distributed mode, but in distributed mode, basically it's smart enough to just send out a request saying, hey, I'm about to download this chunk of data. Anybody on this network segment already got that? And if a client replies back saying, yeah, I've already got it, it can transfer it from that client instead of going back to the server. Turn on a couple of group policies, install a server component on your WSUS or Config Manager server into IIS, and it works. You don't have to do anything else. The Config Manager guys have made this even better because they've added reporting now in Config Manager Current Branch that will show you where did the data come from that my clients are downloading. It will say this amount came from the server, this amount came from branch cache, this amount came from peer caching or other sources. So you can see the benefits easily at a glance using those tools. We're also adding similar capabilities into Windows Analytics for Windows Update for Business to show you how much data was downloaded from the cloud versus how much was provided via peer-to-peer, just to give you a view of how much network traffic you're saving by using these peer-to-peer mechanisms. There's another tool called delivery optimization. This one's new in Windows 10. It works a little differently than branch cache. It's not broadcast-based. Branch cache just sends out a broadcast on the local network segment saying, hey, anybody got this? Delivery optimization sends a request off to a service in the cloud. That service replies back saying, you don't need to download that from the original location. These other machines have already done that, and here's their IP address. You can just contact those machines directly. That's the gross simplification of the process. Certainly there are more details going on behind the scenes and more configuration options, but delivery optimization works really well with Windows Update for Business to do that peer-to-peer distribution of content. Config Manager also includes its own peer-to-peer tool as well. It can share out the contents of the Config Manager client cache. So one machine downloads a particular package, which could be a feature update, into its cache. The next machine that wants that can transfer it, instead of getting it from the distribution point, get it from the local peer. That works particularly well. The other option with Config Manager is they have support for alternate content providers. There are third parties then that make plugins for Config Manager that do even more advanced peer-to-peer sharing, using multicast and all kinds of other techniques to reduce the network impact. So whichever one you want, even multiple in some cases you could do, like delivery optimization and branch cache together, but probably not worth the effort. Implement at least one of them, because using that, you can easily divert 90% of the network traffic from your servers and your core data center switches to instead push that out to the edges of the network. So there's a whole lot more network capacity at the edges than there are in the data center. Your servers don't have enough network interface cards in them. Your routers don't have enough capacity to feed all of that data through to a large number of machines in a short period of time. If you use peer-to-peer, you can just have a few initial canaries pull down the content and then share that out with the rest of the clients. There are several sessions on the related topics. Again, I mentioned that I have a session at the same time as Accenture's this afternoon, where we'll get deeper into Express updates and Express feature updates and peer-to-peer and all these other things. There's also a deep dive on delivery optimization with Narcus and Andreas Hammarskjöld, an external consultant who's very well versed in how this stuff works. So you can attend that session. And he also has then a deep session on branch cache to show you, what's branch cache actually doing? How does it work? How is it actually going about and doing its thing? So you can certainly check those out to get a deeper understanding of those capabilities. So everything that we've talked about, for the most part, up to this point, has been really focused on feature updates. And how do we deploy these semi-annual releases out to the masses of machines in your organizations? But we also had to be concerned about quality updates, which are the monthly patches that we deploy. For monthly patches, we kind of want to avoid the scenarios that we've seen with Windows 7 and previous releases, where organizations would selectively patch their machines. For security updates, most organizations would deploy all security updates that came out. Now, there'd occasionally be one that you might have a compatibility issue with, so you just not deploy that one. Okay, so you have one security vulnerability that's not patched, at least all the others are patched. And when it came to non-security updates, a lot of organizations just never deployed those at all. So we ended up with these patchwork patching situations where customers weren't running the same thing that we were validating in our test labs. Because in our test labs, what we tested was a fully patched Windows 7 machine with every update that we've ever released. Things would work in our lab that would fail in the real world. Okay, so we needed to make sure that we could get the real world to match what we were testing. The simplest way was to move to a different model of patching, using cumulative updates, where it's pretty much a take it or leave it. Here's the bundle, install all the updates. It keeps you fully secure, fully up to date, fixes all the issues for everyone. So everyone running Windows 10 at the same patch level has exactly the same set of fixes on the machines. No more fragmentation in the marketplace. So we have a single cumulative update with no new features being released every month, compared to those feature updates, which are twice per year adding new features. We've taken some of the learnings from that and moved them back to previous Windows releases, not quite all the way. So you do see, like on Windows 7, we'll do roll-ups and other things to simplify the process for Windows 7. But with Windows 10, it's all about cumulative updates. If you have a machine that sits in a closet for a year and you get it out, plug it in, and turn it on, it needs to install one update. That's it. You install the latest cumulative update, the machine is fully up to date, now it's set to go. So much simpler. Now, the downside of that is that they are bigger, they grow over time. The updates continue to get larger. Again, I'll get into that more in my session this afternoon, but it's key to use express updates, leveraging the smarts in the Windows Update agent for it to only download what's changed from the previous month, or 2 months or 3 months if the machine hasn't been patched in a longer period of time. That's fully supported now with WSUS, actually always has been. It's fully supported with Config Manager. They added initial support for that in Config Manager 1702 and then improved it in 1706. So that you can just go into Config Manager, check the box, say I want to enable express updates for Windows 10, and then instead of seeing every client downloading a gigabyte patch every month, they download about 100 megabytes. Much friendlier on the network, much less impactful overall. It's also worth touching a little bit on special purpose devices. If we look at use cases, we kind of put things into two very broad buckets to say that we have general purpose devices, generally used by information workers and frontline workers who really need these additional security improvements and productivity improvements and support for the latest hardware capabilities. So we really want them to stay on that semi-annual channel and get these new capabilities twice per year. But there are some special purpose devices where you can't tolerate that level of change. There can't be any changes over the life of the device. So we do have an option for those so that we can keep those devices 100% stable as long as required. That is the long-term servicing channel. We do have a release of Windows that comes out about every 3 years that has long-term servicing support. We offer that to 2 different channels today. We offer it to IoT embedded vendors. So value-added resellers, system builders, and OEMs can pre-install Windows 10 IoT Enterprise, the long-term servicing version, on hardware that they ship. It's the exact same as what we provide to enterprises, Windows 10 Enterprise LTSC. We just hope that you use it only where it's required. You want to use it on those special purpose devices. You don't want to use it on information worker devices. We don't expect the next release until probably 2019. That's our estimate at this point. The last one came out in 2016. Where that gets interesting is support for new hardware. That maybe you're willing to say, yeah, I'll be okay without the new productivity capabilities. I'll be okay without the new security capabilities. But oh, I can't run it on a new Cannon Lake Intel PC that comes out later this year? No, it won't be supported on the new LTSB release until the new LTSB release comes out, 2019. So just keep that in mind, that it's not something for broad deployment. It is for special use cases. It does have restrictions tied to our silicon support policy. It does have some challenges that you would need to overcome, but it's great for what it's designed for, which is those special purpose devices. So next steps. Obviously, we've made a bunch of documentation and other materials available. So if you haven't seen those, definitely check them out. aka.ms WAS takes you to our main documentation page. Has extensive documentation that walks you through all the different tools and all of the different scenarios that you might want to consider. We also did a short video on Microsoft Mechanics that kind of summarizes what I went through today. You can check that out at any time. We have Windows Analytics available for free. You can try that out. If you go out to the Analytics page, it has the sign-up instructions that you need to go through there. And of course, readyforwindows.com, you can use any time to go out and query the support statements and usage information for any apps that you're using. We also have new capabilities through the Fast Track program. For those of you who have deployed Office 365, you might already be familiar with Fast Track. It's a program where we provide assistance to help you implement. Now we've extended that to Windows 10 as well, so you can leverage these Fast Track services to help you implement. Go to fasttrack.microsoft.com, submit a request, we'll get back to you and say, hey, yeah, we can help. We can help you implement best practices. We can help you implement Windows as a service. So to wrap up, a simple call to action, keep up to date and secure. There are obviously lots of pieces that go into that, including deploying Windows 10 and Office 365 Pro Plus, implementing a servicing strategy and a set of rings, which hopefully you'll go to John's sessions and learn more about that, leveraging Windows Insider builds to prepare for what's coming next, turning on telemetry so that you can leverage Windows Insiders and get much more proactive data-driven insights into what's going on in your organization, and lastly, validate instead of test. Because if you're going to go through the effort of testing every single application every 6 months, you're going to fail. You really need to move to a much more reactive model where you deploy and see what happens. That validation in the real world is key. With that, I have about 1.5 minutes for any questions. The microphone should be live if you care to ask any questions. Otherwise, I'll hang out up front after the session.
Thank you, Mr. Niehaus. Just make sure this is on. Okay, so we are attempting to get on the merry-go-round of Windows as a service, if you will, in our last, so as we went to 1703 in our organization, we were trying to use config manager servicing plans. And apparently there's a little bit of a communication disconnect between the, I guess, the Windows team releasing the actual feature update and the config manager team. And so when the new version of 1709 was released, I guess the metadata in that update changed, and actually the servicing plans that we had already set up, they no longer saw that update because the release date changed. Do you know if you guys are the Windows team is working with the config manager team to kind of resolve that issue?
Yeah, I actually saw an email thread related to that, and I asked the config manager guys about it. I haven't got a response back to them. I didn't make it to the config manager session early enough to ask them about it before their session. Heidi Chang is here this week from the config manager team and owns that particular feature, so we'll follow up. But yeah, that shouldn't happen. They should obviously know the current state of each of the releases and indicate that properly.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go over here.
Are there any long-term plans for MDT? Is that going away anytime soon?
Long-term plans for MDT, yeah, we talked about that a little bit in the session, in the deployment session yesterday, that we don't expect there to be any significant new features added to it, but we'll continue updating it for bug fixes, and we expect to do another release sometime this fall. We're working on it now. We just have a collection of fixes that we're putting in place for that.
Great, thanks.
Back over here.
Are there any plans on making delivery optimization work with bits?
Delivery optimization with bits. That would be a good question for Narcus. So yeah, definitely check out the delivery optimization session that she's doing. It's either tomorrow or Thursday. I don't remember which one, but Yeah, certainly there is a kind of a larger effort of looking at delivery optimization as eventually something that can replace branch cache, but there are multiple steps that it needs to go through to get there.
Because delivery optimization just steps on branch cache and bits and will just destroy WAN links. If that first person who downloads stuff, sure, it will get
well,
cached.
it will. It certainly isn't going to replace it without having equivalent functionality.
Right.
So yeah, certainly they're aware of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you use Intune and SCCM as a controller for one device simultaneously, or do you have to choose either of those?
The question was what?
If I have like a laptop, let's say teacher's laptop, which is mainly, let's say, behind the SCCM controller, but then it's like half a year outside somewhere without a VPN, that kind of stuff. So can I control that time from Intune, or does SCCM use the Intune as a proxy to control that laptop which is outside of our network?
So SCCM downloading feature updates.
Or doing whatever magic it's doing there, mainly.
Is the question whether it pulls it from a distribution point or across the internet?
Yeah.
It depends on the type of content, but typically it will use an internet DP if you've allowed it to use an internet DP. So it will prefer to use a distribution point.
So it's like either SCCM or Intune control device.
If you're talking about co-management, that gets to be gets to be a lot more interesting. That one's much more at the feature level. So if you said Intune's going to do software updates using Windows Update for Business and Config Manager is going to do software distribution, then it's going to use Config Manager DPs for software distribution and the internet for Windows Update for Business.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a functional division, not really a choice that you make, other than you choose which features to do with which tool.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't think they do. Yeah, typically in an internet DP situation, they would tell you to just download the content directly from Windows Update as a failover, yes.
Now, one of our concerns with given current branch is the deployment time. I know you say, well, do it in often hours. We're a hospital. We're 24/7. Right. There is never a downtime.
Yep, and we're working on that. Certainly we have multiple steps that we need to go through to reduce that install time. Each release, we're chipping away at that. Our target is to get it down to just a quick reboot, which would be just a few minutes at that point. The challenge is it's going to take us a while to get to that point.
And if we could have it as you go to be the new current branch and not have to go through the whole welcome when they log in the first time again.
Yes, that's certainly part of it as well, to eliminate that first logon delay. So all of that's on the roadmap. It's just multiple releases to actually bring that completely to so that you can see it. I mean, today, if we look at the feature update installation process, it involves 3 reboots. Well, we need to take it from 3 to 2 to 1, and then get it to the point where it's basically all background activity, and the last reboot is just a simple reboot, and now you're running the new OS. So we'll get there. It just won't be nearly as quickly as you'd probably like. It will take
probably not, but
it will take us a while to get to that point.
Thank you.
How are language packs and the language packs on-demand features on the servicing? Because we support 18 languages, and then on the tablets you have all the demand, like the European fonts, the handwriting recognition, the text-to-speech, and those were all on demand. So will servicing update
Right, so
all
language
of that?
language packs and features on demand, which includes all of that stuff, works fine with Windows Update and Windows Update for Business because it can go out to the internet and grab everything it needs and download it. That is being enhanced in Windows 10 1709, the Fall Creators Update, so that it's basically one big bundle of content and the client can pick and choose. It's not yet solved for Config Manager and WSUS. So for WSUS and Config Manager, the burden is kind of shifted back to you, that you need to pre-stage the necessary pieces on the client and then pass them into setup for it to install those. So there are example task sequences that have been published by people who have figured out, all right, here's how you detect what language packs are on the machine. You can then put in conditional steps to download them locally. You can then specify and install lang pack switch to pass that into the upgrade process, and it'll automatically reinstall them. The same basic process works for features on demand, but it is definitely messy. What we hope to get in place is for the next feature update in the spring of next year, the same approach that we have in place on Windows Update for Business with 1709, which is a bundle of content that includes all the SKU-specific pieces, all of the language packs, all the features on demand, the latest cumulative update, all of that stuff in one big bundle that gets downloaded to WSUS and used by Config Manager to do the feature updates. And at that point, the problem disappears because everything you need is in that bundle and the client's smart enough to go grab what it needs from the server. So it will take another 6 months for us to get that implemented into WSUS and Config Manager.
Okay, thanks.
On one of the previous slides, it showed, it stated that Windows Update for Business could be configured, the configuration could be controlled with group policy, Intune, and then it actually said, or Config Manager. And also in a previous session, I saw a mention of a Windows Update for Business policies node. So does Config Manager really can configure Windows Update for Business now?
Yes, the most recent Config Manager current branch versions added support for configuring the policies for Windows Update for Business, the same way that you could do via GPO. It's basically, if you look at Config Manager functionality, Config Manager's always had the ability to do settings management. People just didn't use it very much. But over time, they continue to add more and more GPO-style settings into Config Manager so that you could use Config Manager exclusively and move away from GPOs.
Okay, thanks.
One more, and then we should probably start getting out of the way.
Oh, great. So my users hate change, like completely, so we deployed LTSC. But if we wanted to cut over to education, that's an in-place upgrade, right?
Yes, you can upgrade from an LTSC, LTSB release to any later semi-annual channel release using an in-place upgrade. So it's the same basic servicing process. You just need to do it using media rather than using a servicing-based approach. So if you've got Config Manager or something like that, you take the ISO contents, add that to Config Manager as an upgrade package, push it out to the machines where it would run setup.exe/auto upgrade, and it would change it from, say, enterprise LTSC to education semi-annual channel. So that's doable.
Yeah, great. So if you said you're going to plan another LTSC in 2019, how firm is that? You didn't sound very certain.
It's the plan. The plans can always change. The challenge is, like, if we look at the original plan when we announced the first Windows 10 release, we had Windows 10 1507 and LTSB 2015, and we said at that point we'll do them every 2 to 3 years. Well, guess what? We did one a year later. We did one a year later because we needed to align with Windows Server 2016. That was a long-term servicing release of Windows Server. If you're going to support Windows Server long-term, you might as well support Windows Client long-term because they're 70% of the same code. So therefore, we said, all right, we'll do another LTSB release of Windows Client. Now we intend to stick to the schedule, but there are always external forces at play where they might say, oh, we want to do server earlier, or we want to do something else, and as a result that date could change. But as of now, we think we're pretty set on 2019.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we should wrap that up to give the next presenter a chance to set up. I'll stick around up front just as soon as I grab my stuff and get out of the way. Thanks a lot.